He spent a decade telling anyone who would listen that I'd never be anything more than a footnote in the family story. Today, he's sitting across from me under the Chin Global logo, waiting for a job that most of the city thinks he's lucky to be offered. 57 floors up, the air smells of premium coffee and tempered arrogance. The corner office glass bent the skyline into a steel horizon that seemed to say, names mean more here than the nicknames thrown at our kitchen table, from doubt to triumph. That was the headline I had rehearsed in my head every time I filed another annual report, every time I signed a contract and forced myself not to call home. When I say I run things, I don't mean the petty kind of running people forget at cocktail parties. I mean the kind where a single memo can reroute 3 companies and a press release can change a mayor's schedule. When Michael called HR asking for an introduction, he thought he was asking a staffing firm. He didn't know, because none of them do, that my little signature appears attached to a surprising number of decisions in this town. He didn't know that the woman who took his childhood jibes as a dare had a seat at the table now, and a drawer that closed on a lot of things. Sarah, the only person in the building who can make my calendar feel like a weapon, sent me the message 5 minutes before he arrived. Michael Thompson here for 10:30. He doesn't realize it's Chin Tower. Her tone was a neat balance of duty and mischief. Security pinged downstairs with the same photo I already had on record. Late 30s, tie slightly askew, a smile that remembers payback as a performance. In the waiting room, he folded his hands over a resume he'd printed in an ink the copier would later swear it had never seen. I let him wait. There's a rhythm to watching someone try to occupy a space you once fantasized about in private. At first he checked his watch, then his phone, then the logo in the lobby, as if he could reverse engineer trust by tracing the letters with his eyes. The security feed gave me his full arc: approach, misrecognition, then that brief human flicker, the moment he registered that this building meant more than another interview. Memory is an odd thing when you're the architect of it. I had my own archive, dinner table clips, the recordings from family gatherings where his jokes landed like small stones in my direction, the way Mom laughed at him and then at me as if size of voice could substitute for competence. Remember the time you told everyone I'd be nothing? I wanted to say it, to make it audible, for the sake of the sound of it. Instead, I reviewed his vitae, a string of 3-year stints, references that read as carefully curated politeness, and in the background, check a pattern of departures that flagged in our system as incongruent with leadership needs. That language is bureaucratic and polite, like a guillotine disguised as HR terminology. It's built to be defensible. It's legal. It's perfectly corporate. Have you ever been underestimated? Share one word in the comments. When he finally stepped into my office, he still wore the slight grin of someone who believed familiarity with the surname was leverage. Michael extended his hand. For a moment I considered taking it, letting him feel the firmness of someone who had once had to learn how to hold on. Instead, I let the silence answer for me. Sarah offered him coffee, regular or premium, and he chose regular without looking. 2 small choices that told me everything. He sank into the guest chair, folding himself into the room like someone who'd always thought he belonged to its shadows. The interview began like any other: credentials, projects, highlights. I asked him about one of his biggest public departures, a client engagement that had dissolved under his watch 2 years earlier. He offered the kind of answer people give when their mistakes have never been told back to them as truth. A soft blame of circumstances, a hand-wringing clause, a promise of learning. I had the original reports pulled up on the screen. The narrative we tell about ourselves matters only until someone else's records disagree. On the wall-mounted monitor, highlighted lines from client briefs and exit interviews glowed with a neutral cruelty. Missed targets, escalations, turnover, not accusations, factual observations that any hiring committee could weigh. At some point during his explanation, the screen switched to something more personal. A clip from a family dinner years ago, black coffee, cigarette smoke, the clinks of chopsticks, where he laughed about my ambitions as if they were a sitcom he owned the rights to. He expected me to feel small in that frame. He didn't expect the room to be arranged so that I could press play and let his past remarks fold back into his present. He went quiet. The noise of the city filtered through the glass. Somewhere below, a sanitation truck scoured the morning off the avenues. He tried to make a joke about surviving on charm and impulse, tried to recalibrate his tone into one of contrition. "I've been working on myself," he said. I could see the practice cadence of someone who had spent time in seminars and professional coaching. That phrase, working on myself, is a lovely neutral to lay over a messy resume. HR likes it. Recruiters like it. It sounds like progress without committing to evidence. I ask for references. That's an ordinary administrative moment, the kind of detail that feels clinical but actually dissolves histories. Sarah's laptop pinged with replies. The first came in polite and vague. The second was a formal, tight note from a previous supervisor that detailed concerns about team morale. The third was an oddly candid message from a client that read more like a factual chronicle than an opinion. Multiple projects stalled, missed deliverables. No insults, just paper trail truth. There are two ways to use power in these moments. One is the cheap cinematic revenge, the revealing of personal failings in a way that leaves scars. The other is the institutional correction. Show the record and make a decision aligned with your company's stated standards. I believed then, as I do now, in the latter. Not because I am kinder, but because a corporation's ethics, however imperfect, needs to be consistent to matter. You don't get to wield a ledger for private vengeance and call it justice. You do, however, get to insist on criteria. "Mr. Thompson," I said, voice steady, "we do a thorough review for any leadership candidate. Your pattern of tenure and the client feedback we've received make this role." I paused precisely so my grammar carried weight, not a fit. He blinked like someone who expected pity or a bailout. Instead of calling in a favor, he asked me to consider family. "We grew up together," he said. "You saw what it was like." I did indeed. I saw an adolescent smirking as I explained compound interest, a young man rolling his eyes when I brought home a spreadsheet. I also remembered sitting in a tiny room with a borrowed laptop, teaching myself some code while he stayed out drinking. Family is a complicated currency. It buys comfort, but not always qualifications. I offered him the standard alternative, a more junior placement, a mentorship program, a path that would require accountability and time, not the headlines he wanted, and certainly not the corner office he imagined. I think he heard the possibility at first as a charity, then as an insult. Charity is rarely received gracefully. He wanted forgiveness framed as promotion. I was prepared to give him the only thing true to the organization, an opportunity with guardrails. There was a moment when Sarah left to fetch a document, when he reached into his coat and shuffled loose papers, photos perhaps, proof of a campaign, a letter he hoped would change my mind. He looked like a man rummaging through the attic of his own past for something he could pawn for sympathy. His hand trembled slightly. I felt a flicker of something tight and strange, pity or recognition. But I folded it into my posture and kept looking at the file on the screen, at the neat lines the company had assembled like teeth. "Your candidacy will be closed," I said finally. I had HR log the outcome with precise language. "Do not progress." I asked our PR team to prepare a neutral line in case the interview leaked. Candidate not advanced. That's how institutions protect themselves, by codifying decisions so they are defensible and repeatable. I instructed security to escort him to the elevator when he was ready. Legal reviews cleared the language. Nothing in the procedure required secrecy beyond the normal confidentiality of hiring. Nothing suggested tampering. Everything was within the system. And then the shredder, because some rituals are human and irreverent, and I have learned that symbols have their uses. The resume he had brought, which I had signed off on in the system as not progressed, went into the paper mouth of an old, honest office machine. It chewed like a metronome eating a desperate rhythm. The sound is banal and savage at once, paper surrendering to teeth. The ash of his ambitions fluttered in a small, ridiculous heap. He watched as his physical representation of readiness dissolved. It felt theatrical, and it felt necessary. He left with his coat closed around him, and the taste of defeat doing the kinds of things defeat does. It makes the present feel cheaper than the past, and the future too heavy to carry. On the security feed, his shoulders slumped. In the elevator, his reflection looked smaller against the polished metal. He sent a text to Mom, simple, 3 dots of apology, and she replied with a heart emoji and a short, "Be kind." Our parents like niceties. It helps hide the ache of household dynamics. I sat at my desk and for a few moments allowed the satisfaction of execution to soften into something quieter. Triumph is rarely as clean as the headlines imagine. My victory had a ledger of its own. The hours I'd stolen in sleep, the moments of being mocked at every turn, the ways I'd chosen not to ask for help when it might have humbled me in front of them. Triumph tastes like strong coffee and like a little metallic aftertaste of solitude. It is both accomplishment and accounting. A board meeting awaited, 10 slides about market consolidation and a new initiative that would take the company into 3 additional cities. I put on the armor of professionalism, blazer smoothed, notes lined, tone measured. The board members arrived one by one, nodding and murmuring about quarterlies. They applauded the numbers and praised execution. In the applause, I could hear the echo of something that had been missing at our family table, recognition without the margin of sarcasm. On the drive from my office to the boardroom, I thought of Michael's laugh, of the small domesticated cruelties he had thoughtlessly deployed, the "you'll nevers," the rolled eyes. I thought about the way institutions can correct private injustices without descending into spectacle. I thought about the difference between being a woman who has fought for a place and being a person who uses that place to humiliate. I have no interest in becoming a monster. I have interest in keeping standards and protecting the business. Sometimes those two objectives overlap awkwardly. There is a strange cleanness in documenting decisions. The files are there for scrutiny, but they are also a kind of truth serum. If anyone asks why a candidacy was closed, the answer rests in minutes and emails and the cold clarity of dates. No one ever narrates a boardroom scene as vengeance. They call it governance. That's the wonder and the burden of being the person whose name sits at the end of memos. You are obliged to make hard choices and face the moral aftertaste. After the meeting, as the board dispersed and the room emptied of small talk, my phone buzzed with 2 messages. The first was from Dad, a photo of a book he had finally read, a sentence underlined, and a brief, "I saw you on the news." The second was from Sarah, practical, efficient. Press team cleared, elevator access adjusted for the next candidate. There was no exultant congratulations in those messages, no trumpets. Triumph in my life had always been quieter, an internal reclassification of worth. I understood then that being underestimated had been both my burden and my curriculum. On the ride down, I allowed a small, irreverent thought. When I was a child, he used to make shadow puppets and declare them kings. Back then it was a joke. Now the shapes we throw on the wall can become laws for those who follow them. Power is a strange mirror. What you see depends on the angle at which you hold it. Sometimes you use it to correct a wrong. Sometimes you use it to remind someone of their place. The line between those 2 things is the only moral work I have left. I am not here to revel in his ruin. I'm here to keep the company stable and to protect the people and projects that depend on our stewardship. Michael's interview became my challenge, not because I sought to punish him, but because it demanded of me a consistency I had not always applied in family matters. From doubt to triumph is a neat arc on a resume. In reality, it is a series of small reckonings where you must choose whether to let your personal ledger rewrite corporate policy or to let institutional standards do the heavy lifting. As I step back into the morning, the skyline seems different only because I'm slightly taller in my own estimation. There is a relief, an industry-hardened satisfaction, and a private question that I will carry like a stone in my pocket. Did I do the right thing? I know the answer publicly looks like prudence. Privately, sometimes it feels like a revenge dressed in a business suit. Sometimes it feels wholly necessary. From doubt to triumph, what would you have done in my place? Comment below.